To say that Yume Nikki is a very important game to some would be a huge understatement. Yume Nikki is arguably one of the most important indie games of the early 2000s, alongside Cave Story, which also released as freeware later that exact year. Yume Nikki's cult following became a phenomenon, spawning tons and tons of fan-made sequels and spin-offs and remakes. It's not only one of the most influential indie pieces from the early days of freeware PC games, but it's a very powerful game in itself. It wasn't like anything else that existed when it released, and there still isn't anything quite like it. Instead of having a coherent goal of getting to the end of a level or progressing through a story, Yume Nikki had its players aimlessly explore the bizarre and eerie dreams of a young girl trapped in her bedroom by her own anxieties. In a way, it kind of became this neat little character study of a game, exploring the subconscious of a human being, figuring out the symbolism, understanding the character's interactions with these figments of her own imaginations, and deciding what it all could mean. I mean, like, it could just mean nothing, right? But that didn't stop a passionate community of people from developing theories and interpretations of their own and sharing them online, and having a fantastic time doing it. Yume Nikki is a very important game to me as well, and in fact, the entire reason I made this channel to begin with was to tell people about games that I really loved that not a lot of people really knew about, and the second game I ever did was Yume Nikki. In hindsight, that video kinda sucks dick now, but you know, it was so important to me that it just had to be one of the very first things I ever covered. And then I went on to cover fan game after fan game after fan game. I'm sure I don't have to do much convincing that I deeply love this game. So when they announced a brand new and official Yume Nikki game after 14 years of not even knowing if the dude who made it was even alive, I had a lot to look forward to, dude. But as I investigated the company producing this new title, I decided to keep my expectations rather modest. Playism. These guys have been slowly acquiring the rights to a lot of different RPG Maker games. Games from the creators of Mad Father, The Crooked Man, Alice Mare, and even Yume Nikki itself. They're not like a bad publisher or anything. I mean, they've published some great indie titles before, like La Milana and Momodora. I think it's just that they saw an untapped market bringing RPG Maker games to Steam and decided to reach out to many developers of popular RPG Maker games and struck a deal with them. I thought this was cool. We got some great remasters of cult classics, and it introduced these games to a brand new audience that would otherwise have never played them. At the peak of this process, Yume Nikki mysteriously had a Steam release in January of 2018. Free to play, as it always has been and always should be, but the quiet release of it on Steam had a lot of people rather puzzled. Why bother getting the rights to something free and putting it on Steam still for free? What kind of business decision is that? But of course, that wasn't all there was to it. Yume Nikki is a valued property after all, and now it's in the hands of a publisher who's ready to make some money. They soon put up this bizarre countdown website, and after more than 2 weeks of anticipation, it struck zero and released information on a new Yume Nikki project. It turned out to be a 3D reimagining of the original game, and after gameplay was actually released, I thought it looked kinda low budget. While the rights were being held by Playism, it was actually developed by a company called Kadokawa, a big name publishing company in Japan that puts out all sorts of different kinds of media. They originally published manga and magazines, but in more recent years they've expanded the reach into films and, of course, video games. So I've decided to look into what games they've actually made before, and it seemed like they haven't really done much more than these throwaway anime tie-in games and visual novels, perhaps comparable to companies like Behavior Entertainment, who were around to develop a cheap game adaptation of any property thrown at them. So there I was, looking at a publisher who just so happened to acquire the rights to one of the most beloved freeware properties of all time, and immediately hired a throwaway studio to make a new game for it. Based on everything I gathered by looking into these companies, it really didn't look like the passion project we've been waiting for all these years, but instead, a big corporation ready to cash in by capitalizing on a property that hasn't seen an official entry in some 14 years. A game that they knew everyone would buy the day it came out, simply thanks to the waiting game. There were glimmers of hope through the cracks in this corporate project, though. The artwork they released looked genuinely rad, and some of the screenshots looked very true to the original game. But here it is, Yume Nikki Dream Diary, a full-blown official Yume Nikki reboot supposedly made completely under Kikiyama's supervision. They explain that during the marketing, and it's the first thing the game makes crystal clear. I can't speak for the legitimacy of this claim, but supposedly the game was made with utmost respect to Kikiyama's vision. I doubt the decision to make the game in the first place was spearheaded by Kikiyama, but they at least got the dude on board to look at the game and be like, yep, that's good, so that much is at least somewhat comforting. But yeah, here we go, Yume Nikki Dream Diary, as they called it. I think that's a fine name. I've seen some people call it dumb because it's the same title twice, and yeah, kinda, but not really though. I think it differentiates it from the original, and it also kinda tells you in English what the game revolves around, and while anyone familiar with the game probably already knows that, there are gonna be a lot of newcomers that don't, so I think that's fine. The game starts out with a brief scripted intro having you walk home from a convenience store before waking up in your bed. Once you're awake, you're here in the bedroom. You're free to walk around it and interact with anything you can. Like the original game, you can play the Famicom hooked up to the TV. This time, instead of just Nasu, it's Super Nasu. If you've ever played that Bubble Trouble game on miniclip.com, it's not much different than that. As per usual, it's barely worth mentioning, but you know it's something essential, and I think it's cool that they created a new version of Nasu instead of just slapping in the original. Interacting with the desk will no longer save the game. Instead, the game just has an autosave feature. Now the desk is used to view the concept art that you'll unlock by finding it laying around the dream world. In any other game, I really wouldn't care much about the concept art. I always found this to be a somewhat lazy unlockable, you know? It's something that gets made in the process of making any game, right? So it's something they just already have laying around and just hand to the player as a reward. But this is a different case. When it comes to Yume Nikki, there's no other game I'd rather see the official artwork for, though I am unsure if these are actually the OG drawings done by Kikiyama or newer renditions of them by this game's artist. Either way, there's also some high-quality 2D renders in here that look beautiful. Concept art is definitely worth looking at, and I think it's very fitting that they placed it all in Madosuke's dream journal, as if she's doodling all the monsters she sees in her dreams. Aside from the dream journal, we've also got the balcony, which there's nothing to do here, of course, and the door, which Madosuke shakes her head when trying to leave, and the bed that you'll use to enter the dream world. Yeah, I think the room's good, you know, they checked off all the boxes. Everything that needs to be here is here. Just like the original game, going to sleep is going to have you wake up on the balcony, and then exiting the room will enter the Nexus, a circling hallway of doors that'll lead to different dream worlds. Instead of 12 doors, we've only got 6 this time, half as many as in the original. 5 of them are available from the start, but there's a locked one in the back you can only access once you've cleared the other 5 areas. Yeah, you heard me right, you clear every area. The game is no longer this expansive world with tons and tons of areas that all interconnect. Instead, you've got 5 somewhat linear levels that you'll explore and complete by getting to the end of it. We've got the mall, the alley, the docks, the school, and the desert. The alley is probably the most straightforward of all of them. You kinda just dodge some obstacles and stealth past dudes until you get to the far right of the screen. Then you enter a slaughterhouse and do some minor puzzle solving and continue right to the highway, watch a scripted event, and then you wake up and the area is considered clear. Most areas in the game are a straight-up side-scroller, but there are a couple of areas that will let you walk around freely. You do have full movement in the alleyway, but you'll still just make your way all the way to the right in a linear fashion. You don't really get to explore. The mall level is somewhat open. You can walk all around, going up and down escalators, but there's only one side area you can enter, and once you go where the game wants you to, it again just becomes a side-scroller. The dock level has an element of puzzle platforming as well, similar to games like Limbo or Inside. You'll push blocks, jump and climb on platforms, and activate mechanisms, all the while outmaneuvering Tyrannigan that give chase. I do think the Tyrannigan's new designs are genuinely creepy, but the camera's so pulled back that you can never really get a good enough look at them to really appreciate that. If you get caught or you fall into a pit, you'll simply respawn at a checkpoint. There's really not much penalty to getting killed in this game. The school level follows suit, also being a side-scrolling puzzle platformer, but the desert, on the other hand, is where things start to actually become somewhat open. You can take the train to a number of different areas and find a series of items and characters to interact with. You'll have to do this to collect the 4 tablets to open up the Aztec staircase. Out of every level in this game, it was the desert level that I really had a good time with, and honestly, I think that's because it's the only level that somewhat resembles the open world design of the original game. The other 4 levels are all extremely linear, with only moments here and there of very minor exploration. Of course, the effects make a return, but there's not nearly as many as before. While the original game had 24 effects proper, this game only has a measly 5. However, instead of being mostly for show, the effects in this game are all practical. If you get one, you will need it to solve a number of puzzles or to overcome certain obstacles. Firstly, of course, we've got the knife effect, used for killing NPCs or cutting down certain objects. Next up, we've got the umbrella, which makes it rain, but on top of that, it'll also grant Matsuki a double jump and a glide. You can use this for reaching higher areas, passing long gaps, and for making platforming all the easier. The flute also returns, allowing you to play songs by pushing the 4 face buttons on your controller, or I guess with the keys on your keyboard if you're not using a controller. This, of course, is simply used for NPC-based puzzles. We've also got the lantern, which this time Matsuki simply holds it in her hand instead of her head turning into it, which I don't think that's nearly as fun, but it's used for lighting up dark areas. It doesn't really do that much for lighting, honestly, but there is an area where it becomes a brilliant piece of equipment. There's a spot in the game with these mannequins that can only move when the lights go out, but if you have the lantern with you, you'll have full control over when they move since you now control a light source. That's one thing I do really like about this game. There's sections that are finishable without an effect, but if you do happen to have the right one, it can make the experience easier. It's kind of like getting to pick what order you want to do the Mega Man levels in, and certain ones will be easier if you have the right equipment. Now, the last effect is something brand new, the Hamza. It's a charm that'll unveil secrets and stuff. There's often a symbol in the background indicating where you're going to want to use it. While it is disappointing that the game lacks a ton of the effects from the original, it is at least nice that they all do have practical uses. I never felt like any of them were useless, and instead of selecting the effect from the start menu, they're now all simply mapped to buttons on your controller for easy access. I do wish some of the more iconic ones like the bike effect and the frog effect did make appearances though. Speaking of appearances, why don't we talk about how this game looks? It's definitely a low budget game. It's really not hard to tell that. Most of the models do look fine, but anything that's a human character, especially Matsuki since you're looking at her for the entire game, I find it kind of looks like they were made by college students. I mean, like, I used to go to an art school, right? I was seeing models on par with this from students all the time. The animation is also fairly stiff. It might look like an indie game from 2018, but it moves like a PS2 game. It kind of feels like a PS2 game too, the way it controls, which isn't bad, it just feels budgeted. And I mean, like, there's plenty of great games that were made on low budgets. Dreadout, for example. That game rules, but the low budget is pretty clear with the animation quality, yet I never felt it really took away from the experience, and I somewhat feel the same here. I really don't think it ruins the game, but again, it's just that this is a valued property, and I think it deserved a better treatment. It's just one of those games where you look at it and you're like, yeah, this is a low budget Unity game. That said, while some of the animations and character models aren't quite up to snuff, the environments can look really nice. The lighting effects are pretty decent. I mean, like, take this forest, for example. The composition here is wonderful, and the use of silhouettes, it looks awesome, dude. And I think that's the strongest thing about this game, is getting to see familiar locations remade from the ground up. I think they got most of the iconic areas in here. The highway, the woods, the mall, that little office room, the desert, this little area. They did ditch out on the areas that were just black screens with objects on it, but I don't really mind that because there was nothing to those areas anyway, and it would have been a very lazy effort to do those ones over these ones, so I'm kind of glad they decided to focus on the more elaborate areas instead. Some of my favorites like Mars and the White Desert are nowhere to be seen though. They did get most of them, but there are gonna be at least a couple you're gonna wish made the cut. The pink sea leading up to Paniko's house though is outstanding looking. I've noticed that they've added these weird white balloon looking creatures all floating towards and swarming around Paniko's house. Yeah, you guys know what these things look like, I don't have to spell it out to you, but part of me thinks that they're maybe acknowledging some of the darker theories about Uboa and wanted to add something that could help symbolize fertility or something like that. You know, since this theory would have Paniko's house representing a womb or whatever, or perhaps, you know, they just wanted balloon-looking creatures floating around because they fall in line with this area already having balloons. Take it as you will, I think it's an interesting addition. It could mean something, but that's entirely up to you. The actual encounter with Uboa itself is pretty disappointing. He didn't even get a 3D model or anything, it's just a full screen jump scare that lasts like half a second. There's some more familiar faces as well, like Minoe and Monoko, but they both have very different roles in the game. Monoko is in a hidden area where she'll chase you through a maze of beds, and Minoe you'll have to chase through the school. There's some more like kyukyu-kun and Masada, but I won't show them in case you wanted to see like some of this game for yourself, because I'm kind of like showing all of it. Oh, there's another familiar face as well, but not from Yume Nikki. There's an Oni Easter Egg where you can find a game cartridge and play an arcade version of the first level, but with Yume Nikki characters instead. Now that is a cool touch. I guess that also means that Playism has the rights to Oni now, so perhaps that'll be the next thing they remake? Who knows? But yeah, once you complete the main 5 levels, you can do the last level and then you get the ending. And that's all there really is to it. It's just a very simple puzzle platformer game with minor elements of exploration and light aspects of point-and-click adventure gameplay. Honestly, it kinda plays closer to something like a Poor Man's Inside or Little Nightmares than it does a Yume Nikki game, and for the most part, I'm okay with that, I guess. It's really not gonna be what most people are looking for, that much is certain. It's a pretty mediocre game, but I would struggle to call it a bad game. It does a lot of things I do really like. I like the practical uses of the effects, the adventure game style gameplay in some areas, and seeing many areas recreated really nicely in 3D. There's a couple of interesting design choices here, like the before mentioned white balloon things. Oh, I really liked how they handled the Desert Party Easter egg. They turned it into this eerie remains of some picnic, leaving the out-of-tune radio crackling and struggling to keep the correct pitch. I find it to be a lot more foreboding and mysterious this way. But even still, I found myself wishing this game was so much more. I really wish I could fully explore these areas in 3D, like the woods or the alleys. I desperately wanted to break out of these 2D restrictions and really look around. That's what Yume Nikki was all about after all, exploration, and stripping that down into something this linear kinda betrays what the entire point of Yume Nikki was. I really wouldn't blame anybody for being very disappointed in this game. It's really not what I think they should have done with it. Instead of being a faithful remake or reimagining of Yume Nikki, it kind of became this very unrelated kind of game, but with Yume Nikki characters and backgrounds in it, you know what I mean? But that said, even if it wasn't what I was looking for or expecting from it, I did still enjoy my playthrough of it. I did encounter a number of bugs on my first playthrough of the game. The worst one is when I would come here and the camera would get stuck on the entrance, making this area completely unplayable. But they fixed it one day later. There's a community page where you can submit bugs and they're actively fixing them, so there's at least a valiant effort to keep the game up to date and functional. It's $20 on Steam right now, and it'll take you anywhere between 2 to 4 hours on a blind playthrough, depending on how lost you end up getting. Closer to 4 if you're really thorough with getting all of the collectibles. I honestly really wouldn't bother getting this game unless you're a huge fan of Yume Nikki and you really just want to see some familiar locations remade in 3D. That's all it really has to offer. Otherwise, for this price, you're honestly better off getting something like Little Nightmares or Inside. I think the best thing that could happen to this game is for it to have decent sales but very critical reviews. That way we could show Playism that there is in fact interest in this property, but we're also not entirely satisfied with what they gave us. Perhaps this could push them to try something else with Yume Nikki, something a little more faithful, who knows. It's not great, it's not bad, but it's certainly not what anybody hoped for. But hey, that's exactly what I expected to happen. That's why I think it's important to approach things like this cautiously optimistic instead of just falling into the hype. Will we ever someday see a new proper Yume Nikki game? Who knows for sure. But for now, we got this and well, it's better than nothing.